Hello, everyone. This is the final part of the lecture on regional blocks and regionalism by the ASDC 2026 CAP. I'm happy and I'm really excited to share with you this last part, and thank you for watching all this way for this one. This is the final part regarding regional blocks in South Asia. We'll be talking about the two regional organizations at the SAARC as well as BIMSTEC. I think the reason why South Asian regional blocks is a rather under-discussed topic in debating is just because I think South Asia's regional blocks are relatively weaker compared to its regional counterparts like ASEAN that we mentioned previously. There's obviously always debate and discussion surrounding how they should proceed with the region and whether or not regional multilateralism is a way to go for the subcontinent. Let's talk about firstly the SAARC. The SAARC stands for the South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation. Um, it was initiated by the country of Bangladesh in the 1980s. It is participated by India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Bhutan, Nepal, Maldives, and recently in 2007, the country of Afghanistan. I would note that the SAARC, unfortunately, is a rather inactive organization, politically speaking. Bureaucratically and like logistically, it still operates. There are still people working under this. There are still certain types of scholarships and awards provided for the region. But politically speaking, and the macroeconomic and geopolitical goals of that organization have been quite stagnant since 2014. As the summit hosted by Pakistan in 2016 was indefinitely suspended. For you to understand about the SAARC, you also have to understand the initial hesitance for the two largest countries participating in it from the get-go. Pakistan and India both were reluctantly members of the regional organization after mediation from organizations like the UN. The bigger fear was that smaller South Asian nations would coalesce as a result of this regional bloc, and as a result, banding against them and their own political goals. Obviously, if you're a large regional actor like India or Pakistan, having a multilateral organization that you don't feel as if you have control over does make you fearful over whether or not the smaller states that was initiated by Bangladesh would rise up as a greater power compared to you in that region. Evidently, India-Pakistan relationships and tensions are a primary factor of why this bloc has been paralyzed. India has refused to attend the 2016 summit after the terrorist attacks in Kashmir. Pakistan has refused to change the summit location to another member state, and as a result, the 2016 summit and right now has not been held to this day. For talk about the SAARC, we also should talk about the types of initiatives that the bloc has had. One is the SAFTA, which is the South Asian Free Trade Agreement. This was a similar project that wanted to emulate the success that ASEAN also had when it comes to its free trade agreement. But unfortunately, it was just a agreement that received very little improvement over the trade. If you see recent trade statistics between South Asian countries, namely the member states, how much these countries trade with each other are just unfortunately a relatively lower portion of their GDP, of their overall trade volume. It takes up only 5%, which means that it is relatively insignificant. It is 5 times smaller than how much Southeast Asian countries in ASEAN trade with each other, as we mentioned in the past, with 25% of their regional GDP. As a regional trade volume was conducted through ASEAN. The primary reason why South Asian countries don't have that much connectivity and intra-block trade is, I think, what was identified as an issue of regional connectivity. So it means that like South Asian countries are not logistically connected as well with each other compared to their regional counterparts. And as a result, the volume of trade that you're able to engage with them relative to them engaging with bigger countries like the US and China are just significantly lower. The SAARC tried to implement different types of initiatives in the past, but unfortunately they were not successful. There was attempts of free travel of cars and trucks initiative. There was also a regional railway collaboration. These were all brought up and discussed. These were also seemingly popular initiatives, but I think Pakistan eventually vetoed or also at the same time chose to, I think, neglect these types of policies, which I think has led to I think the stagnation of the region's ability to develop regional trade routes that are oftentimes done through land. But there was still considerable success, even with the bloc's paralysis. There was an emergency fund allocation that was, I think, in the millions and billions for COVID-19 relief. That's these organizations were able to allocate outside and I think put aside their political differences. It's interesting to talk about like countries putting aside their political differences when we want to talk about the regional organization's revival. Um, so even if the summit was not held since 2014, there are people and actors in the region who want to revive the organization. Um, in this case, the incumbent BNP government in Bangladesh has made it its political priority to also revive the bloc. It was the founding member of the bloc. I think it's trying to revive it in light of, I think, like recent revolutions that has created a political shift within Bangladesh. Pakistan has also suggested a revival, a trilateral organization of China and Bangladesh with on board for this type of revived organization in the DSAARC. But uniquely, I think what it does is that it excludes India from the bloc specifically. I think Pakistan has mentioned that it is a concern for regional security, and the bloc is aimed at improving the situation, even though they don't target one specific actor about that. I think it's important and interesting to discuss the likelihood of the revival and the chances of whether or not this bloc will become something that it was not in the past. The incumbent Bangladeshi government has been more willing to work with Pakistan on this revival because of domestic politics shifting against India. The original Bangladeshi authoritarian government that was led by the Awami League in Sheikh Hasina that was ousted in 2024 was very, very close with the state of India. I think after the revolution, the transition government as well as the incumbent government is just politically more aligned with the country of Pakistan more than India. It has chosen, I think, it's to take its political sides with another ally that is clearly not India, which means that I think the chances of both of them sticking and continuing on board with this policy of revival is quite likely. But obviously, this agreement is dependent on other smaller states. Smaller states like Bhutan and Nepal actually have engaged with larger countries through bilateralism. So even if we say that regional blocs in South Asia are minimal, it is not an indication that the region does not work together frequently. I think the BBIN, which is Bhutan, Bangladesh, India, and Nepal, had motor vehicle agreements which allowed for the trucks and cars to pass through their borders more efficiently when the policy that was discussed in the SAARC was failed. What this means is that I think obviously these smaller states are aware that a regional bloc that is led by a superpower is not a specific and only alternative that they're able to have compared to the status quo. They have chosen to take up policies that are connected between each other that are more bilateral or direct negotiations rather than through regional blocs. But also at the same time, I think a political move to exclude India from the revival program obviously would also probably look badly on these smaller South Asian countries. They, I think, have a strong emphasis on regional connectivity, which means that they don't just want to connect with one specific actor like Pakistan or Bangladesh or China. They want to connect with the region in general because I think trade and they recognize is just more interconnected than siding with specific allies. So that's also a comparative that you have to take into account on whether or not they would be willing to participate multilaterally or they will stick with the existing bilateral agreements. India obviously also plays a large role in whether or not this organization can succeed. The inclusion of China as a regional security threat like is just a big thing and a big priority for India in its recent border conflicts and skirmishes with China. I think this is continuing. The fact that I think Pakistan is choosing to include China in the revival of the SAARC is just quite a risky move. I think it's probably going to draw and I think this is just predictions, but like the idea that like the Indian state would probably not see this very favorably. I think they'll see this as a greater encroachment of Chinese influence along their borders and along their trade routes. I think India's probably are and will be more incentivized to, I think, act in ways that are just more negatively reactive to the revival rather than one that is positive. But yeah, that is about its revival. Speaking about India, I think India has not been stopping through after the SWARC was suspended. I think it also equally has its share in regional organizations, and the one we're talking about is BIMSTEC. BIMSTEC is a very long name. It's the Bay of Bengal Initiative for Multi-Sectoral Technical and Economic Cooperation. It used to be, I think, Bangladesh, India, and I think Myanmar, Sri Lanka, and Thailand economic cooperation, but they chose to also include countries like Bhutan and Nepal afterwards, which meant that they also had to switch the name to it. It's quite interesting. But this is India's attempt at regional multilateralism. I think it has a greater emphasis on the countries that surround the Bay of Bengal, which is also an important trade hub for global international trade. That is why Pakistan is geographically excluded from this organization. It is just more trade and commerce centric as well. But talking about the initiatives that BIMSTEC has had, it has a few things. I think the one thing that was recently ratified a few weeks ago was the Maritime Transport Agreement. It was an agreement that wanted to optimize shipping routes that connect the member states between each other, allowing for the ships that are passing through different member borders to just be a bit more efficient. It was newly ratified, which means that I think the implications of that agreement is to be seen, but it has shown that I think the regional organization is capable of making progress when it comes to that. Obviously, it did take quite long. I think this agreement took about 10 years in its ratification for it to be ratified and agreed on by all members. So it's another indication that I think these types of policies are just debated and discussed on for very large amounts of time, even when it only includes lesser members relative to the rest of regional organizations. There are also proposals for a free trade agreement. It wanted to emulate the SAARC's free trade agreement on SAFTA. But obviously, I think if we're paying attention, that didn't work out. So I think it's still interesting to see whether or not this proposal will have been passed in the first place, or whether or not it is something that will be effective even if it was passed. I think what is BIMSTEC specifically unique about is just the inclusion of countries like Thailand and Myanmar. These are countries that also are ASEAN member states, but also border the Bay of Bengal. What this means is that I think there's a closer connection that this regional bloc has with its larger counterpart ASEAN. Thailand, which just recently hosted the BIMSTEC summit this year, also has made it quite explicit, saying that like it wants to play a larger role in regional politics, and they see BIMSTEC as an addition to ASEAN, and its ability to bridge both of these organizations is something to be seen as well. So I think more reading that you can do into the BIMSTEC and the regional bloc itself is also quite exciting. But also at the same time, I think it also does fall similar issues to the fact that I think it's a slow organization. These countries already have pre-existing agreements with each other. Whether or not BIMSTEC is a priority for these member states, and in terms of whether or not multilateralism is an important thing for South Asian countries in the Bay of Bengal, is something that also should be debated on, and is something that is also very interesting to cover and read about. That concludes the training lecture for regionalism and regional blocks in Asia, South Asia and Southeast Asia. Thank you so much for tuning in. All the best for ASDC. Obviously, I can't tell you whether or not these motions will be up and whether or not regionalism will come up, but I think it's something that you definitely should read about and prepare for ASDC coming up in Vietnam. I'll see you guys very soon over there, and thank you so much for tuning in once again.